Hello and welcome to our channel, Cheating Exposed. Today, we're revealing another story. My wife cheated with multiple men while I served in the army. So, let's get started. When I first joined the military, I was very naive. I believed the recruiters about many things without understanding the difference between doctrine, the way things should be, and reality, the way things are. I thought officers were the best and brightest college graduates, aloof but selflessly focused on the mission. I also believed non-commissioned officers were the most competent and capable soldiers, promoted solely on merit. Lastly, I thought as soldiers could find family among our fellow enlistees, all united in supporting and defending the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. However, I discovered in my first year that, with few exceptions, none of these stereotypes were true. I had married my high school sweetheart, who was a couple of years younger than me, and I was eager to prove myself as a soldier and a man. I volunteered for overseas assignments, war zones, and the toughest duties. Coming from an impoverished background, the military seemed like the best way to escape the ghetto and enter the middle class. The sales pitch was simple: if I took care of defending the United States, the army would take care of me and my family. Unfortunately, that promise didn't hold up for me and my 19-year-old bride. By the way, all names have been changed. My initial military training included boot camp, airborne qualification, and ranger training. I checked a lot of boxes and was officially a badass, according to the U.S. Army. But instead of being assigned to Special Operations Forces or the 82nd Airborne, I was sent overseas to a security detail that had nothing to do with being an elite warfighter. It was just the luck of the draw. Without going into too much detail, the job involved a demanding schedule: 24 hours on duty, 24 hours off, followed by an 8-hour work schedule for 3 days. However, due to downsizing and the numerous overseas conflicts, the U.S. Army cut our manpower from 5 shifts down to just 2. This meant our schedule turned into 24 hours on duty, followed by 6 hours of admin work, and then 18 hours off, 365 days a year. Instead of the promised 2,000 work hours annually, my peers and I were working close to 5,000 hours every year. This is how I struggled to manage both my job and my marriage during my first duty assignment in the military. Erin, my wife, had a high school diploma but no specialized education or training. While I was on shift, she spent countless hours at the on-base recreation center, surrounded by hundreds of young soldiers. Erin, 19F, was a stunning blonde with blue eyes, a model's figure, and a killer smile. She was the quintessential high school cheerleader but also sharp as a whip. Our plan was for her to focus on college classes while I worked hard to provide for us. My shifts were grueling. Within the first few months, I was physically and mentally drained from the endless 24-hour schedule. By the time I got home, all I wanted was a hot meal and some sleep. As newlyweds, we still had sex about 3 times a week, but I was so exhausted that I'd often fall asleep right afterward. It wasn't long before Erin's eyes began to wander. She had started taking college courses, and overseas, it's common for officers to earn extra money by teaching night classes as adjunct professors. One of these professors was an officer, an Olia 3, I'll call Captain Dustin. My wife would constantly gush about how brilliant Keith was and how much she loved his classes. After hearing about this amazing teacher for weeks, I decided to check out one of her classes. Peeking through the window, I saw her face light up in a way that made my stomach churn. She looked like she had a crush on him. When we eventually met, I had to address him as Captain Dustin, but she casually called him Keith. The dynamic between them made me uneasy, especially their potential interactions outside the classroom. But my 24-hour shifts didn't let up. Toward the end of our time at this assignment, Erin asked for a legal separation. I suspected it had something to do with Captain Dustin, but I didn't have the time, or the financial means, to investigate. Reluctantly, I signed the separation papers, sending her back to the continental United States 6 months before my rotation ended. Later, I discovered that her request for separation coincided with Captain Dustin's return to the States. When my tour ended 6 months later, I was surprised to find Erin ready to reconcile. I loved her deeply, and growing up with a divorced mom, I had vowed never to get a divorce myself. It was a personal life goal to stay married. So, I took her back. Part of the reason she returned was that my mother-in-law, Mil, shamed her into coming back to me. We moved to a new duty station, and things initially seemed to improve. My work hours were finally reasonable, 8-hour days, and I had earned a few promotions. With the extra income, we could afford more luxuries like dining out and date nights. Life seemed to be stabilizing, but everything changed one day when I came home early. As I stepped inside, the phone rang. This was before cell phones became common, so we had a landline with one phone in the kitchen and another in the bedroom upstairs. My wife picked up the call, and I instinctively grabbed the kitchen extension. "Hello, Keith," she said. I immediately covered the receiver so she wouldn't know I was listening. My heart sank as I heard her talk to Captain Dustin, the man I had long suspected of being involved with my wife. The conversation confirmed my worst fears. She started with, "Can we talk?" and "I miss you," followed by intimate details about their year-long affair. Dustin had followed us to the new duty station. It wasn't a coincidence, he had deliberately inserted himself into our lives. I didn't have a recorder to capture the conversation, something that might have helped me later, but the final blow came when she ended the call with, "I love you." I was crushed. Without hesitation, I confronted her. "How long?" I demanded. Through tears, she admitted that their affair started when she was his student overseas, fulfilling the cliched teacher-student fantasy. It had resumed when we returned to the US. "Why Dustin?" I asked. Her answers stung deeply. She explained that he was a captain with flight pay, meaning he could afford luxuries I couldn't as a junior soldier struggling to make ends meet. He took her to restaurants, motels, and showered her with gifts, while I could barely pay the bills. She was tired of being poor. As a man, I couldn't help but wonder if he was somehow better than me. Was he stronger? More exciting? Better in bed? She reassured me, or so she thought, saying his physique didn't match mine, his performance wasn't extraordinary, and he wasn't better. Then came the words that cut the deepest: "He makes me feel like a princess, but you're still a pauper." Anger and betrayal consumed me. I wanted to make him pay, but I knew I had to tread carefully. Any physical retaliation against a senior officer could lead to a court-martial, jail time, or worse. Still, the thought of this 28-year-old man continuing to sleep with my 21-year-old wife made my blood boil. Erin cried constantly, insisting it was a mistake. I couldn't hold back. "It may have been a mistake overseas," I said, "but it wasn't a mistake when we returned to the US. He pursued you after we reconciled, and you let him in. You spread your legs for him." Her response only deepened the divide between us. "But I came back to you," she said. My reply was cold and final, "But you're still screwing him." From that moment, our intimacy ended. I couldn't touch her, I didn't want what felt like his leftovers. The disgust and resentment created a toxic atmosphere in our home, and the emotional distance only pushed her back into Dustin's arms. After weeks of tension, hatred, and silence, Erin approached me. "We need to talk," she said. Reluctantly, I agreed. Erin claimed she never denied me food, love, or sex, even while sleeping with Dustin. She insisted our marriage was her priority and that he was just sex, just fun, and a way to feel special when I wasn't available. I agreed that my military duty overseas made me unavailable. 24-hour shifts took a toll on us. But our legal separation ended when I returned to the US. I was working 8-hour days and home most nights except for occasional week-long field training exercises. How was I still unavailable? I had taken her back because I was still crazy about her. My former cheerleader still had the same toned, fiery look that had stolen my heart. But discovering she continued to sleep with him, even when I was around, drove me insane. They weren't just sneaking around occasionally, they were meeting during lunch hours and shacking up at motels while I was on training exercises. Despite my anger, I couldn't stop myself from loving her. She was intoxicating, physically and emotionally. But I drew a line. "If you keep seeing him, I'm going to fuck him up," I warned her. A week later, I received orders for an unaccompanied 1-year tour overseas in a combat zone. Before I left, we made love every morning and every night. Her affection felt desperate, almost as if she knew this might be the last time. Once deployed, our communication relied on handwritten letters. Email wasn't accessible in combat zones, so her letters took a week to reach me, and mine took another week to return. Over the year, we exchanged 24 letters. But rumors started circulating among soldiers rotating in and out of my unit. They talked about my wife hanging out at the officers' and NCO clubs. Stories flew about her sleeping with Captain Keith D., Captain Jeff C., Captain Tom R., and eventually a guy named Rick C. What was once my sweet, young bride was now being painted as the base's barfly. I held on to my anger, fueled by the humiliation of these rumors, and planned my revenge. When I reached my 6-month mark and was eligible for mid-tour leave, I looked forward to confronting her. But when I went to buy my ticket home, I discovered that my savings account had been emptied a month earlier. I tried using my credit card, only to find it maxed out. Desperate, I called home every 2 hours for an entire day, no answer. I tried again the next day, still nothing. Frustrated and out of options, I wrote an angry letter demanding to know what happened to my money and what was going on with Keith, Jeff, Steve, and Tom. With no way to go home, I cancelled my leave and threw myself into my duty. I volunteered for every dangerous mission, earning respect from my fellow soldiers and a promotion. By the time my tour ended, I had new medals and a sense of accomplishment, but my marriage was as good as over. When I finally flew home after 12 months, I found Erin waiting for me, pregnant. She was 4 months along, and the timing made it clear the child wasn't mine. Worse, she admitted she didn't know who the father was. She had been sleeping with multiple men during my deployment. Through tears, she said, "We can fix this." But some things can't be fixed. I wasn't going to be married to someone who had so thoroughly betrayed me. A divorce was inevitable. Not only was Erin pregnant, but she also had a sexually transmitted disease, STD, and pelvic inflammatory disease, PID. That was the final straw. I filed for divorce immediately. Unfortunately, our state was a no-fault state, which meant adultery wasn't recognized as grounds for divorce. At the hearing, I was relieved to avoid paying alimony. However, I was still stuck with child support payments for a child that wasn't mine. The law in our state dictated that if you were married to the mother, you were financially responsible for the child, regardless of biological connection. Despite the financial burdens, the divorce brought a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Erin had finished college while we were married, and I had co-signed her loans, leaving me stuck with that debt. I also had to cover the residual car payments and, of course, the child support. Desperate to ease my financial strain, I volunteered to return to the combat zone. Danger pay, free meals, and a renewed focus on my career became my way forward. 16 years later, I received a letter from her daughter. It was the first time I had heard from the child I had supported for all those years. She wrote to ask if I would grant permission for her to change her last name and be adopted by her mother's new husband. I was thrilled. Finally, a way to sever the last connection to my ex-wife and the painful past. I wrote back immediately, granting her request. With the adoption, my child support payments ended, and I felt a sense of closure. Erin had married one of her affair partners, Rick, and the child took his last name. Years later, when she got married, Rick walked her down the aisle. I wasn't invited to the wedding. So why am I writing this? To get it off my chest. For years of emotional turmoil followed by nearly 2 decades of financial, indentured servitude weighed heavily on me. But at last, I'm free. I often thought about tracking down her lovers and exacting revenge. But after the divorce, I chose to focus on becoming the best version of myself. I earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree, built a successful military career, and eventually found a loyal and loving wife. My happy ending took almost 20 years to achieve, but I got there. Why didn't I seek revenge? The truth is, no woman, or situation, is worth jail time. The level of violence I would have needed for satisfaction simply wasn't worth it. Walking away from a disloyal wife and focusing on my life was the best decision I ever made. Erin's actions taught me that loyalty and integrity are priceless. My military superiors may have had no qualms about betraying one of their own, but I refuse to let bitterness define me. Now, I have peace, love, and a life I'm proud of. Ultimately, my journey reminds me that while betrayal can break you, it doesn't have to define you. With time, resilience, and determination, even the most broken hearts can find their happy ending. Well, folks, that's all. Thank you all for listening. Please like, comment, and share the video if you enjoyed it. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you will be notified when we upload the next video. Take care.